My first experience with Drupal was not as a web developer or as a site builder. I was in need of a website for a personal project that I had, and at the time I had no intent that I was ever going to be building websites for anybody else. So I had used a few website builders, and I had actually used another content management system. I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. I couldn't have even told you what a CMS was, much less what competing CMSs were. And so what I was doing, I was on shared hosting, and there was the fantastical script installer, and I was just making my way through the script installer, trying different options for tools to build my website. And eventually, I made my way to Drupal after I had tried other tools and they didn't work for me. So I think I might have known what Drupal was. Well, I think I had heard the word Drupal at that time, but I didn't really know what Drupal was. And so, I didn't really know what I was going to be doing with it, other than it was just another tool for me to try, since the other ones weren't doing what I wanted them to do. So I installed it, and I saw this was Drupal 6 something, 6.19 or something like that. And once I had it installed and I went to the website, I saw the message there about that I didn't have any content added yet on the site, and there were the list of steps of the next things to do. So I started following my way through the steps. And the first step, I believe, tells you that you can extend the functionality of your site through using modules, and the link takes you to the modules page, which is what I did, and I looked at the modules that were there, and I saw the blog module, and I was thrilled, because that's where I was getting hung up with on the other tools that I was using, is that I couldn't figure out how to get a blog on the site. So that was a wonderful first start for me, that the blog module was there, and I was really happy. And I also had a much easier time building the menu structure, my static pages, and then putting them into a menu, so the menu appeared on the page. Of course, I was using the Garland theme, and so the Garland theme places your menu links in a particular area based on the theme. But I loved the Garland theme. I thought it was great. I liked the blue colors. I liked the way that it laid things out, and I was moving forward. At the time, you put everything in the navigation menu, because that seemed like a logical place to me to put things. That's what we use to navigate the site, right? It's the navigation menu. I didn't have any idea that it was for administrative type functions, but that didn't matter to me. It was getting the job done, and I thought that I had it pretty well figured out. I couldn't understand why anybody would need any other types of menus, so I didn't have any thought of adding any additional menus to the site. So I was moving along, and I had looked through the other modules that were there. Obviously, this was just core that I had installed, and so I was looking at the optional core modules, and I saw the path module, and that just confused me. I didn't understand, based on the description, the way that it said that it allows users to give whatever name they want to the path. And I couldn't understand why anybody would want to enable that. I thought, why would I want to let my users rename the path for these things here? I want to set my pages up. I don't want them to be able to give it a new path. And so I didn't use the path module. I didn't really know anything about SEO and being user-friendly with the path name, so I'm sure all the modules on my site were just named node/something or another. And this is how I moved forward, using only core, using the core theme, the Garland theme, not having the path module installed. I also didn't install taxonomy, because when I read that description about it allows you to categorize content on your site, I thought that, what happens if I don't categorize things properly? Then the site might not function. Taxonomy seemed like a really big scientific word to me, and taxonomy seemed like a big scientific word to me, and I was intimidated by it. I thought that a person would have to be really smart to know how to properly categorize things on the site. So I stayed away from taxonomy for a long time too. And it wasn't until I realized that I was getting all these spam registrations on the site, and by the way, it took me a while to realize that they were spam registrations. Initially, I thought that it was just amazing that so many people were finding my site and wanting to create a membership on the site, and in fact, in the beginning, I would send emails to those people and say, thanks for becoming a member of the site. Give me any suggestions you have for making the site more useful for you. Because I didn't have a clue that they were spam registrations. They were most likely registrations that were done by a bot. They weren't even done by a human being. But I didn't know that. And so it took me a long time till I even realized that, and then realized that I had a need for some way to mitigate the spam registrations. One of the things that I don't know how long it took me to understand actions and triggers on the site. One of the other tools I had been using previously had some option in it. I don't know if I had to enable it or if it was just enabled by default, but it would send me notifications when people registered for the site. So that was one initial frustration I had with Drupal, was that it wasn't doing this function that this other tool that I used was doing. And I thought, well, that's a real drag that Drupal can't do this. And of course, it's not that Drupal can't do it, it's that I hadn't discovered actions, triggers, and actions yet, which I did eventually discover, and I was really proud about that when I learned how to set up a trigger and a corresponding action for the trigger. Even though that was really no big deal to set things up so that I got a notification when somebody registered for the site. So I eventually did discover that these user registrations were spam registrations, and I needed to get some type of a spam mitigation feature on the site, and I installed CAPTCHA. I don't remember if I installed the reCAPTCHA as well, but I think I did manage to put it in the right place. I think I did put it under Sites All Modules. I didn't put it directly under modules. So I think that's one thing that I did right initially as a new user. And so things were good until somewhere down the road I received a message that there was a security update, and we advise that you update immediately. And so I was very nervous about it because I didn't want my site to be vulnerable. I don't know whether my site was even vulnerable anyway, because I didn't understand how to read the security advisories and whether it was mitigated by anything or not. I just saw on my site that there was this red message in a box there. I don't even know if I had things set up so that I got the email that there was an update. It might have just been when I was administering this site that I saw that. And so I see this message that says there's a security update. You should update immediately. And the Fantastical script didn't have the update. So I had to figure out how to do it on my own. And I had no idea what I was doing. I was thankful that I had this file manager through cPanel, because I didn't know anything about using a terminal session and SSHing into a server to do anything from there. I had to use the file manager. And so of course I didn't know anything about Drush at that point. So I signed in and I went into cPanel and I used their file manager. And I really don't remember how whether I got the zip file or the tarball from Drupal.org. I guess maybe in the message that says that there's an update available, you must have a link. Honestly, I use Drush all the time now, so I can't even remember whether that message provides a link to download Drupal or not. I believe it does, so probably what I got was the tarball, onto my local machine, and I went through the file manager and I uploaded the tarball. And then I was super duper thankful that the file manager was smart enough to know how to extract the files from the tarball, because I thought, well, wow, I would have no idea how to do that if I didn't have this icon in the menu to do that for me. So I extracted it, and then I had to update. And I didn't know what was safe for me to update and what wasn't safe for me to update. I really hadn't made the connection that just leave the sites directory alone and replace everything else, and you should be fine. So I know I spent quite a lot of hours doing that first update, because I was, at least in the root directory, I think I was comparing the files. I was looking at the new versions, I was looking at the old versions, and I was scrolling through the files to find out whether I had modified anything in there. I mean, I knew I hadn't been into the server doing anything, but I didn't know when those files got modified. I didn't know if there was anything that I needed to record, any of the changes I needed to apply. So it took me hours, and it was stressful, it was time consuming, it was frustrating, it was scary and challenging. I got it done, but I definitely was not looking forward to having to do another upgrade. Eventually I did get the idea that, oh, well, this isn't so bad. I just delete a bunch of these files, don't touch anything in the sites directory, extract the files from the tarball, and then just move those things over, and then I was fine. So I reached the point that I was able to do an update in, 10 or 15 minutes, and I felt pretty good about that. I thought that I was really starting to get the hang of things. Well, it wasn't until it was somewhere maybe a little bit over a year after I had that site set up that I had gotten some feedback from some people that said that my site looked kind of plain. It was a little bit boring. And so by that point, I think maybe somehow or another I had learned about contributed themes. And since I had already installed a contributed module, I had an idea about the process of installing a contributed theme. And so I looked around for contributed themes. And honestly, I don't know how I found the one or chose the one that I ended up using. But it was a theme that allowed you to have different variations of it. You can configure things. And so I went crazy enabling all of these different variations, because I thought it would be cool for my users on the site, because I also had set up user profiles so that they could choose their own theme. And so I had all these themes set up, and I was going through, when you install a new theme, the block administration doesn't necessarily come across. So I spent a lot of time going into these themes to place all the blocks that I had on the site in the right place. And I thought this was so wonderful. This was, just such a cool thing that I was doing, that it was going to be so great for my users to be able to choose their own theme. I really didn't think about how ridiculous it was that, I'm in charge of branding my site. I don't need to give everybody their own ability to choose their own theme, but, I was responding to the feedback that I got that the site looked kind of boring, and I thought, well, okay, this is going to take care of that. I'll just load all of these themes up, and people can choose whatever theme they want, and maybe they'll find something that makes them happy, and they'll like that. So that was my first experience with using themes, and that's the way things went. Eventually, things changed in my life, and I decided that I was ready to go back to programming, and that I did want to teach myself web development. And since I had been using Drupal on my personal site, it made sense that I should learn how to do Drupal. And what I did was I would come downstairs in the morning, I'd sit down on the couch, take out my laptop, and for somewhere around 12 hours that day. Obviously not non-stop, but let's say that I would get downstairs around 9 in the morning, and I would start reading stuff. And I would be at it until 9 or 10 or 11 at night, with whatever breaks in between, until I decided I had enough and I was ready to go to bed. And so I'd read whatever I could find online. And the process that I went through, I would start reading a page, and of course, many pages have links on them to other pages. And I wanted to make sure that I knew the fundamental concepts, that I got down to the first principles of everything. So every time I would come to a link on a page, I would open it in a new tab so that I could start reading that page. And of course that page had links on it, so I'd read a certain amount of that page, and I'd then open in a new tab, and I just would have all these tabs open all the time and really not make it through any one page, because I felt like I had to keep finding the thing that was being referenced. So I spent a lot of time spinning my wheels doing that, and never really getting a foothold. Fortunately, another thing that I did is that I thought to look on meetup.com and search for any Drupal groups. And there were Drupal meetup groups. So I started attending Drupal meetup groups, and I would go there with a list of questions, and I would ask the questions that I had based on what I had been reading. And, I started picking up a little bit more here and there, and was able to start doing a few more things. Well, one of the meetups that I had gone to, I had played around with some contributed module, and I don't remember what the name was exactly, but it was creating some type of block for you. And so, having looked at that module, I had come up with an idea of writing this other module that was going to give you a more generic type of a block that you could put stuff in it. I don't really remember what I was going to be building, but I thought I had this great idea for a contributed module, and I was going to be making a name for myself in the Drupal community, because here I was so new to the community, and I was already going to be contributing a module, and everybody was going to find it so useful and say, why didn't I think of that? This guy is so brilliant. So at the meetup, I described this module to people, and I had some questions about it. I don't remember exactly what my question was, but in the course of describing this idea that I had for a module, there were a couple people at that meetup who looked at me with a kind of puzzled expression on their face, and they said, well, I think you could probably just do that with views. And I didn't have any idea what they were talking about. What do you mean, views? Like, what's views? So the person who was running the meetup said, well, let's just take a look at it. I've got views installed on my development environment here. Let me just do this. So he went into one of his instances in his local development environment and opened up views, and he spent, 5 minutes clicking around doing a few things, I guess. And he showed me, here's this block that's on the site that was doing exactly what I described. And I was just blown away. First of all, this views thing that he was using, I thought, wow, how did he figure that out? How do you know how to use this? You have to be really smart to use this, I bet. And I'm sure I asked him, how long did it take you to learn to use views? And I don't know what his answer was exactly. Sure, he said something like, it takes a little while to learn, but it's not as bad. I think he said it's not as bad as learning something like panels, for instance. But I really had something to think about there. Not only about learning to use views, but my whole idea that I was so brilliant and I was going to contribute this module that was going to be so useful to everybody. And then I get to see this thing that was just light years ahead of what I had been thinking about. And so I thought, wow, here I thought I was going to be such a smart guy, and now I see what somebody who's really smart and really good at Drupal can do. I don't think I'd ever be able to do anything like that. And I wouldn't say right now, even with all the experience that I have, that I'm really ready to write a module as large as Views is. But, I'm sure I went home that night, and as I would do after pretty much all the meetups that I went to, is I'd sit down and I'd start playing around on my computer to see how to do that. So, this is how things went for me, even as a beginner developer. One accomplishment that felt like a major accomplishment for me was learning how to install the local development environment. I know when I had been initially reading the documentation, when I was just building my own website without the idea of becoming a web developer or a site builder, I had come across something in the documentation about setting up a local development environment, and that was something else that I thought, you must have to be really smart to set this up on your computer. I don't know if I'd ever be able to set up a local development environment. But since I decided to become a developer ultimately, I revisited that page, and I was developing on Windows at that point. So I downloaded XAMPP and I installed it, and I felt really proud of myself for having a local development environment. And I had even somehow or another developed enough of an understanding to use on Windows, it's the hosts file. So I had set up my hosts file. I can't imagine that I was using the vhosts file at that point. I really don't remember at this point if I had understood how to use the vhosts file. But, I had things set up so that when I went to my local development environment, I didn't have to go to localhost / something or another. I was able to put in some type of pseudo URL that I used. And I felt really proud of that. I felt like I was making some good progress. And I had done enough looking at some contributed modules and looking at the code to get some idea of how to build a module. Although actually, I guess that's not true. When I wanted to write my first module, to experiment with doing some things, what I did was enable the PHP filter, add a new piece of content, and put a bunch of PHP code into that node. And at that point, I did know about the path module. I was no longer afraid of the path module, although I was probably still afraid of the taxonomy module. And so I could give it a path name, and I would go to that path, and my code would be executed. And I felt really proud of myself for that. I'm starting to write some Drupal modules. And eventually, I realized that that wouldn't give me a way that I could contribute anything back to the community, that I must be doing something wrong here. I need to take this out of the node and get it into a proper module. And so I did start doing some research about the .info file and the .module file. And again, going to my trusty meetups with my set of questions, I'm sure I brought that up, the idea that I wanted to be able to write my first module. And I think that the module that I had placed, or the function, the program that I put inside of the node body, had a form in it. I was using a form tag. And so I think when I described that at this meetup, somebody mentioned to me about the form API. And naturally, I didn't know what the form API was. I didn't know about api.drupal.org, certainly. I don't know if I found out about it at that meetup. I think that might have been the meetup where I found out about that. But I didn't know anything about the form API. And so when they mentioned the form API, I followed up with another question that was probably something like, what do you mean the form API? What is that? And so another person at the meetup told me that, well, he had made a screencast about using the form API. And so I wrote down the information so I can get to the screencast, and I came home that night after the meetup, and I watched his screencast. And so I was going to write my first module. And I was going to use the form API, and so I wrote this little hello world type of a module. And that's when things really started to click for me. Because in order to write this module, I had to use hook menu. So I learned about, a little bit at least, about Drupal's hook system, having had to use hook menu. And I think I probably used hook help as well. So I started to get more of an idea of how somebody does things in Drupal. And with my previous experience using views, I got an idea of some tools that are available for you to do things in Drupal. And so I was starting to put some pieces together about the way you do Drupal. I don't think that I knew about CCK at that point though. So I knew about different content types and the value of using different content types, defining new content types, and using different content types to do things, because that could be really helpful when you wanted to filter something in views. So I think I was using content types, and I think, I learned about node queue. I don't know why I had learned about node queue. I think it was just, I had watched a video podcast on it, and I had watched a number of these video podcasts, and I happened to see the node queue one, and I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. So then I decided to learn how to do a views slideshow, because now I knew about contributed modules, and using the content types, I had done my own module to do this form, and so I wanted to start learning the next thing. Only, like I say, I don't think I really knew about CCK, and I certainly didn't know about the WYSIWYG and the rich text editors. I knew enough about HTML that I was comfortable putting HTML into the node body to do everything I wanted. I understood about using the image tag to reference images on the server, but I didn't know anything about the image cache module either. So I went through this process of creating a slideshow, and you can actually look on my blog, the blog.isaacsonwebdevelopment.com. That's one of the first blog posts that I wrote. In fact, that was a presentation that I did at Drupal Camp, Colorado, in June of 2010, teaching people how to do a view slideshow. And I think at the time that I had done the camp, I did then know about CCK. But I wanted to make sure that the presentation was focused enough that it was really just about views and view slideshow. So the way I put things together was that I had a couple of node queues, and I would directly put the text in one node body, which is pretty standard operating procedure. There was no problem with that. But then I had another node where I would put the image that corresponded to the text node file. And so I was doing the HTML markup to put the image tag in there. And then naturally I had to make sure that I had my nodes in the right order in node queue. Or it might even be the case at that time that I didn't yet know about node queue. So I was making sure that I had the two different content types. I think I had the text content type for my slideshow, and I had the image content type for my slideshow. And I had to make sure that I created the nodes in the right order, so that way when views pulled these things, they would match up with each other when view slideshow cycled through these two blocks that I was placing on the page. So I came up with this way to build a slideshow that was, honestly, kind of kludgy and bizarre. But again, it's something that I felt really proud of myself for figuring out how to do this, and I thought I was really starting to get the hang of things. So my experience as a new developer, I think, is similar to a lot of new developers when they start using Drupal, that they don't understand how to use Drupal functionality properly. And they'll hack things together in a way that on the surface it looks like it works, but underneath it's kind of a mess the way it's done, and it's not very easy to maintain. It's not that easy to use. Think about having to make sure that with your slideshow that you've got to create your nodes in a certain order so that everything would match up the right way. Besides the fact that even building views that way with the two separate blocks for getting this information and getting the things to line up properly, as opposed to having a proper content type that had an image field so that you could upload the image that you would like to be associated with that node text, and using something like the image cache module so that you could set your image presets. It's just a better way to do things, but initially people don't know about this, and it takes time to learn to do it. And it also takes time to learn how to build this site in a way that when you turn it over to somebody who needs to maintain it, it's going to be easy for them to do it. It's so easy to overlook what you need to do to help those site maintainers. So like when I had built my first paying website, which was for my wife, she had started her own business, and she wanted to have a certain set of features on her site, one of which was having these images in the sidebar. And the way that I went about doing it is that I found images, I scaled them, I cropped them the way I wanted to do that. I created a block for each image, and in that block, I uploaded the image to the server, I created a block to then reference that image, and I went through the block administration interface, and I placed all of these blocks using the block admin interface and say what path names they were supposed to appear on. So as my wife would change her mind about how large she wanted the images to be, I'd have to scale and crop them again and upload them again and do all this stuff. And it was really aggravating for me. I said, just make up your mind, this takes so long to do this. But it didn't have to take that long to do it if I knew how to properly structure things so that I could use views to create the block dynamically based on the node that they were viewing at that point, because that image was uploaded and attached to that node. And I used image presets so that I didn't have to keep on uploading new raw images that were going to be used directly, that I'd have the main image that I could use the scaling and cropping functions on. So, I had things set up on my wife's website in a way that she couldn't control any of that stuff when she wanted to change it. And to me, I thought that, she was asking for something that was really specialized and complicated. But it wasn't. I just didn't know what I was doing at the time. And I had a lot to learn. And I learned it over time. But this is the case for a lot of people when they start out. And this is a situation that a lot of people who paid to have a site will run into, is that they will end up hiring a developer who doesn't really know Drupal and will build the site in a way that's so hacky and kludgy. And then you get people who say Drupal is impossible to use. Like, this is a terrible tool. I can't maintain my own site. This is impossible. This is so incomprehensible. It's so illogical. But it's not because Drupal can't do things better. It's because the person who built the site doesn't know how to do things. And I don't mean to criticize the people building the site, because I've already acknowledged I was in the same situation. I made a lot of the mistakes that a lot of new developers make. And that's still the situation to this day. There's a tremendous need for skilled Drupal service providers, site builders, themers, designers, developers, and that need is not being met. Despite all of the sites to teach people how to do Drupal that exist, the paid sites and the free sites, we still don't meet the demand for skilled Drupal service providers. And it's a demand that's forecasted to be around, to continue, and to most likely increase. So we've got the situation that there are web agencies, there are companies that just have a website that need Drupal developers, and they have a hard time finding anybody at all to do the work for them. There are also a bunch of want to be Drupal developers out there, or web developers out there, maybe not specifically Drupal developers, but people who would like to get into the web development business who don't have a great way to learn how to do this. And then there definitely are Drupal developers, or want to be Drupal developers, who don't have a way to get into this. And one of the things that I encountered when I started my business and felt that I had enough skills to build websites for people is that I would be in different situations in which I'd hear these Drupal developers talk about how they're so busy and they've got so much work and they're having to turn away clients. And it was really frustrating for me because I didn't have any projects. I was struggling to get my projects. And I couldn't, I didn't understand, like, well, where is all this work? How come I can't get any of it? So we've got the same situation now, that there's a need for Drupal developers, and yet there are people who would love to be Drupal developers that can't get their projects. And so we need to come up with some other way to help with this situation. And that's why I decided to build Teach Yourself Drupal. It's a different way to approach things. It's project-based learning instead of task-based learning. But it's free. And it's totally open source. It's meant to be ridiculously open. And it's going to be built in a way that is going to be accessible for users. Another thing that's going to be a key feature of it is that, like I say, new developers will tend to make a lot of mistakes. And it's hard to remember what it's like to be new. When the developers make some of these mistakes, it could be almost like a gut reaction from the more experienced developers, myself included, to look at the person and say, how could you do something so stupid? Why would you think to do that? What's the matter with you? Why would you ever do that? And, think about that. Somebody like me who actually did that same thing before. Still, it's this gut reaction that I can have. So, Teach Yourself Drupal is a safe place where these new developers can go, that they're not going to get that type of reaction from somebody, where they're not going to have to be embarrassed about not knowing how to use the path module, or taxonomy, or how to use menus properly, where they're not going to understand that it's not a good idea to enable the PHP filter and put PHP code inside of nodes. They're going to have a resource that allows them to start from nothing and to learn the Drupal best practices. This is going to be to their benefit because it's going to enable them to build a skill set that's going to be marketable and highly sought after, and it's going to be a benefit to all of the people, the companies, the different organizations that are desperate to find Drupal developers. So this is something that I have big hopes for, that I think is going to be able to provide a tremendous help in addressing the situation. But the only way to find out is to get it built. And that's why I launched the Kickstarter campaign. I'm busy now. I'm contacted every week by recruiters pitching me opportunities. But I've got to turn all of them away because I don't have any spare time right now. I'm working as many hours as I can. And so it's really hard for me to sit down and try to build this product for free in my own time. And I would say that training shouldn't be provided for free anyway. Just because I'm making this site available, totally open source, and free, doesn't mean that nobody has to pay for it. Ultimately, the vision is that these individual website owners, these companies that have websites, these web agencies that need Drupal developers, will sponsor the site because it's in their vested interest to make sure that there's an increase in the supply of these skilled Drupal service providers. To make that happen, I need to build the prototype, and I need to acquire a large user base. I need to be able to demonstrate to these prospective sponsors that this tool really can accomplish the task of increasing the supply of skilled Drupal service providers. So that's why I'm doing this Kickstarter campaign. I need to build the prototype, I need to acquire a user base, and I need to demonstrate its capacity to help with the situation that we've got people out there who think that they're Drupal developers and think they know how to do things and that are building sites in a very poor fashion, that are making their clients very unhappy, giving them a very negative view of Drupal, and to help the people who would like to be able to get Drupal projects but don't have the skill set yet and don't have a way that they can demonstrate what they're able to do. So, thanks a lot for watching the video. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to what I had to say. You can look on the right side of the page to see the reward levels that I have. I'd love for you to be a backer at any level. I am serious about being ridiculously open. I look forward to having a ridiculously open partnership with all of my backers. I look forward to having a ridiculously open partnership with anybody who wants to support me in any fashion. Maybe you want to get involved with the project. Maybe you want to help producing the scripts and the screencasts. Maybe you've got suggestions for how I can improve things. I welcome all your input and your feedback. You can use the Contact Me link. You can use the comments if you're already a backer. Or if you don't even want to do it through Kickstarter, I've got the GitHub repos and the wikis and the issue queues. You can create a GitHub account if you don't already have one, and you can contribute through there. This is something that I'm absolutely convinced will be valuable for the Drupal project and for the Drupal community. And I'd love to have the opportunity to show that my confidence is well placed. So please, back me for whatever you can, collaborate with me in any way you can, and help spread the word about this project so that we can get this off the ground and see what we can do. Thanks for taking the time to watch the video. If you have any questions or any feedback, please do get in touch with me.